deepfakes in the sound sphere, and how would I technically describe it, Mike?
Well, there's a couple of different categories that you might be looking at. So you have text-to-speech, which is the sort of more conventional approach to the larger space of voice synthesis. And you can use text-to-speech to simulate the voice of a particular person in terms of both their vocal cords as well as their sort of manner of speech and the way that they insert pauses and emotion in their speech. What my company Modulate focuses on is voice transfer or voice conversion, which is also called speech-to-speech. So one person is speaking live to another person in the chat, and they are effectively swapping out their vocal cords, but they still maintain control over the emotion and the nuance of how they're speaking. So they're still the ones sort of using the voice. You can almost think of it as puppeteering the voice in that context.
Mike, can you make us hear a deeper voice? Something? Can you change your already changed voice into something deeper?
Yeah. Absolutely. This is certainly deep enough. We can find a middle ground as well. But we've been able to develop this technology to basically allow anyone to effectively go beyond the limits of their biology and say, whatever voice you want to portray a character, to put on a performance, to help tell a story, or in many cases, just to express a different part of your identity. We want to give everyone sort of the freedom to define that for themselves.
And you're doing this live?
Absolutely, yes. And I can
very easily swap between a
wide variety of different voices and
gives you all sorts of different types of voices, including sort of an old-fashioned robot, ranging all the way down to
a more sinister, growly kind of villainous voice, to give you something of a sample there.
Okay, let's switch back to your original voice, which is not the female one, of course.
So the first voice that I was using, or you want to hear what I really sound like?
The real Mike.
The real Mike, yeah.
Fair enough. I feel like this one's the most boring mic of all, but I'm happy to start with that for now.
For what we know, it could be another fake voice. So.
That's the dramatic reveal at the end.
Okay, cool. I'm looking forward to it. I think the key thing here is to understand what's the difference between speech-to-speech versus text-to-speech.
Yes, there's a couple dimensions that these things vary along, but probably the most important is that, as it says on the tin, text-to-speech starts with text. And that's something that computers know how to generate very easily. So when you're doing something like your Google Home or your Amazon Echo, they're using text-to-speech systems because the software knows how to generate what text the system is supposed to say, and then you just have to turn that into audio. So text-to-speech largely is sort of for managing a computer-to-human interface. Speech-to-speech, in contrast, requires that you already have some kind of spoken audio that you're starting out with. And that sort of assumes that there's actually a human on both sides. So speech-to-speech is really focused on more social applications where two humans are trying to interact with each other. And for some reason, you want some kind of augmentation to the interaction. And so our focus at Modulate is on sort of social apps and video games where players or users might want to either sort of, again, become the character they're playing as in a video game, just express their identity in a different way, or quite frankly, just kind of have fun and mess with their friends with a wide variety of different voices.
So the main things that pops into my mind when I'm hearing voice to speech versus text to speech is clearly the tone and the fact that when you're hearing a voice to speech representation or I don't know if I can call it deep fake or anyway simulation, it's definitely more natural and it feels less robotic.
That's absolutely the intent. And as I was sort of alluding to before with text to speech, because you're starting from the text, the machine learning system has to do everything. not just the vocal cords, but it also has to say, where do pauses go? How should I emotively express this part of the sentence? And what you actually find is even with the best text-to-speech today, something really interesting is they still don't quite know how to insert pauses to allow humans to breathe. And we do something really interesting when we listen to speech, which is that we, as a listener, sub-vocalize what we're hearing. And so what you actually find is if you try to use text-to-speech for a long block of text, say an audiobook or something like that, people will actually report getting out of breath listening to that text-to-speech version of the audiobook, because the speaker, quote unquote, is pausing so infrequently that even just sort of sub-vocalizing it as part of your listening process, you're actually running out of breath. So there's all those kind of little subtle things that we do end up picking up on when you hear text-to-speech, and it just doesn't feel quite as organic. Whereas with what we're doing, because it is a real speaker who's generating the input here, and we are actually synthesizing this new audio from scratch, we're not just modifying the signal, but because we're able to still take those cues where when I'm speaking into the system, I'm telling it exactly how I want it to be emotive. I'm telling it exactly where the pauses go. All it has to do is change kind of the vocal quality, or what's known as the timbre. And so there's a much narrower problem we're asking it to solve, which is much more focused on just the quality of the voice and less on does this sound like an authentic human, which allows us to land on something that feels much, much better sort of to a listener.
Clearly. Yeah, gotcha. Do you feel, with regards to the possible applications, so you just mentioned one of the easiest things that I can think of, and it popped into my mind a few days ago when I heard an extract from the latest book from Barack Obama, where he's reading his own book, and I'm thinking, what the hell? He must have something better to do than reading his old book again for everyone. And so that would potentially be an interesting application, because you would just how do you synthesize his voice, record it? What would you do in that case?
You could, but the fact that we're only changing the vocal cords is in this case kind of a double-edged sword. So say I was to create a voice skin of Barack Obama, and then I was to try to speak using that voice skin, still ordinarily sort of acting like myself. You're not going to perceive that end result as Barack Obama. He has a very distinct way of speaking. He's presenting. He has these pauses that he inserts at different times. He comes across very differently from the way that I do, independent of our vocal cords. And so if I just add...
So he would speak with an Italian accent if I were to
exactly, which, is great from a creative perspective, from the perspective of wanting to express yourself in fun and unique ways. The ability to take, Barack Obama's voice and use it to recite slam poetry in Italian is phenomenal. And there's so many interesting directions you could go. But voice skins and the work that Modulate is doing, for this reason, we think that it's really not sort of well equipped for sort of imitative purposes, because if you actually did want to use this to directly imitate Obama for recording his audiobook, you would need to hire a voice actor who was able to insert the same pauses Obama would, who was able to sort of figure out how to speak like he would. And at that point, you're already spending the money on hiring a very talented voice actor. And how much are you really saving by not finding a voice actor that also has close enough vocal cords? We're still able to do some work for you, but it's not kind of as big. So we, for that reason, as well as for the ethics reason, we said we don't really want to be trying to focus on helping people imitate each other. That doesn't really seem like the right core use case for our technology, which is, again, why we kind of landed more in the entertainment space, where it's more about self-expression and immersing yourself into a particular character that you're portraying at the time, but who is fundamentally yours. It's a character you are designing yourself. It's not you're trying to come across as some other real person.
On an ethical perspective, that makes totally sense, and it's also probably safer. So it's a good limitation to have with the technology.
Thank you.
Today.
Yeah, it's something we've thought about a lot, and if you check out our website, we've got a pretty detailed section talking about our thoughts about the ethics of this technology, and a big part of that is that we're not using it for this kind of imitation. There's other controls we have too. For instance, we're of course not making voice skins of anyone without getting their consent first. But maybe somewhat more interesting than that is we've also developed watermarking technology, so that when I was speaking to you with those voice skins before, there was actually a kind of secret watermark embedded in that audio. And if you have the correct sort of decryption key and the correct algorithm, you could identify that watermark. And today that would just tell you, hey, this is synthetic audio generated by Modulate, which at least lets you know this isn't the real celebrity if someone tries to use a voice skin to say offensive things and blame it on the celebrity. Down the road, we've even explored additional opportunities, like could we actually embed the user ID of the speaker into the watermark itself, so that if someone does post that information and sort of violate the use, we would actually know which user that was and be able to remove them from the platform so that they can't sort of misuse the technology moving forward.
See, Azeem, speaking of digital twins and NFTs.
This is really interesting because to me, when it comes to like the potential nefarious use cases, I think the idea of having to have like not just the intonations with the pauses and the ways that everyone talks is fascinating, but like let's say Elon Musk has been tweeting a lot about Dogecoin of late. Like last night he did it, right? So to me, what it's been something I've just thought a lot about is what are people going to do? Because as we see, I don't know, when you watch the news in the last 4 years, everything with Donald Trump, fake news, the way that disinformation spreads much more easily is most people aren't going to know what's fake and what's real. And even though you guys are ethically acting in putting this out, I've been really curious as to like the stopgaps that will be in place for the people who don't care about the ethics of using this and figure that they want to pump a stock or cause havoc or whatever it may be. And so it's interesting to hear that you guys are putting that in so that you would know who's using it so that you could actually identify them.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean the challenge of sort of fake and synthetic news and all of this misinformation is a hugely important one, and where our first priority is obviously to make sure that our technology doesn't get used to exacerbate the problem. But we're also trying to ask, how can the expertise that we've developed, give us an opportunity to actually help resolve things too. And so I think not exacerbating the problem is us embedding the watermark into our own sort of software, so that if someone tries to put something on Facebook of them using a Barack Obama voice to say a bunch of horrible, hateful things, we can know that that's fake, and we can, in fact, tell Facebook, hey, this is fake, you shouldn't be allowing them to post it. But I think really going the next step, something that Modulate's not involved in today, but that I've been following very closely and I think is really, really valuable, is what I kind of call chain of custody. So what if instead of just watermarking synthetic audio, what if we could, in some sense, watermark real audio in a way where we, when you're visiting websites on the internet, HTTPS is basically a chain of certificates where eventually you reach someone that you trust to verify everyone else. And I wonder if you could do a similar thing where audio is published using the cryptographic watermark that belongs to the New York Times or something like that. And that watermark was actually generated by a specific hardware chip in one of their microphones that no one else can replicate. And if that's the case, then you're given the opportunity to say, do I trust the New York Times? Yes, no. And that still is a question unto itself, of course. But whatever your answer is, that's all you need to figure out. You don't need to figure out who else was manipulating this audio in the meantime, because as long as the watermark is still there, you know that it's authentic to what the New York Times originally was claiming was true.
Traceability of information.
Exactly, yeah. And so that's why I'm sort of calling it chain of custody, is ultimately what I think is going to be incredibly valuable here is where I don't know if we're ever going to be able to adjudicate, here is necessarily the true fact. Everyone else should just shut up and believe it. The world is complicated, and there's a lot of different perspectives that have real evidence in favor of them. And I think that we're all made better by having to actually do the hard work of really scientifically debate these complex questions. But at the very least, I hope that we can get to a point where we can correctly attribute where these things are coming from. And we can at least stop sort of having to do he said, she said, or these sort of ad hominem attacks, and just say, look, this data is coming from this source. Either we can agree that we both trust the New York Times and we're interested in moving forward assuming this is true, or we can say we don't trust the New York Times, and that's the conversation that we need to have. But we're not going back and forth of, what about this pixel that's slightly out of alignment and therefore I don't need to engage with the question, or therefore you must be an idiot, or anything. Like, hopefully getting us a little bit closer to having mature and powerful conversations that can move us all as a society in the right direction.
It's makes me think of the fact that we got three monotheistic religions that are the main religions in the world, and they're based basically on the opposite kind of principle, which is someone else telling me for hundreds and hundreds of years, and actually thousands of years, what someone else said, who we don't even know if he exists or not. So it's an interesting thought process. That one.
Yeah, that is an interesting call out.
Go on.
I have to call out though, sort of in reference to that. Yes, there is sort of that different source of truth in those three cases, but at the very least, all three of those religions share a lot of the most important common tenets, right? Be kind to those around you.
Yeah.
Don't go out on a murder spree. They share most of the important morality, whether or not you can sort of trace it back to that original source of truth. So I think there's actually a lot less conflict in the places that, to me, are sort of most important for building a good society in there.
Speaking of which, what would you define, or do you already have them maybe already defined, the equivalent of the Asimov's laws in the space of, should I call it NLP, natural language processing, AI, and deep fakes?
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to give you, here's law 1, 2, and 3. And part of the reason is that almost every sci-fi story that involves robots since Asimov has basically been centered on the fact that those 3 laws don't work, right? The reality is you can't just have 3 simple laws that embody everything about human morality. It's more complicated than that. For me, I think a lot about there's a phrase I've seen about things sort of diverging at the tails, and this is kind of what I was getting at when I was talking about the 3 different religions all have the same core morality. I think we all, as much as we love to debate and as much as we love to sort of ground it in different philosophical principles, most of the time when we're walking down the street, it's not a debate between the person who thinks, hey, I should probably punch that person in the face, and everyone else trying to say no. We're all kind of agreed, don't punch random people in the face, right? We only have these really complicated moral questions when we step way outside of normal society and start asking, thought experiments of what if a single AI controls all of reality and can decide who gets food and who doesn't. And the reality is, we're fast approaching a world where some of these things are less thought experiments than they used to be, right? There are a lot of really complicated sort of actually realized sort of philosophical questions that we're now starting to have to deal with. But for me, as a builder of what some people might call AI technology, I try to just call it machine learning and be very clear that it's not truly intelligent. But as a builder of that, I just try and stay in the normal society zone where there's pretty obvious right answers. And I try and explicitly limit my technology and say, look, this is just not the sort of thing that was built to go into these really weird gray areas. And as Modulate grows and as society gets more in-depth thinking about these questions, maybe we will start to repeal these technical limitations. But for now, we're kind of specifically designing this thing for purposes that everyone kind of has a pretty good head around. There's a lot less of a possibility of really catastrophic use cases for it. And I think for the most part, that feels to me like the right way to build this technology, is build it very intentionally, forcing it to operate at a small local scale where everyone kind of knows each other, everyone knows what they're trying to achieve. And only once you prove it works there, do you start scaling it up. And there's a lot of more sophisticated things you can do if you're really trying to build an AGI, but that's probably a whole other conversation that we could dive into. So maybe I'll pause for a second there to avoid running too far away with the conversation.
Oh, I like also the digression. One subject I want to go back to, though, is speaking of ethics. You guys are part of a coalition which is Ethos. Could you explain a bit how that works? Because the feeling I have is that with technology in general, we've always had law and legislators being quite slow in defining what can be done and what can't. So it's good to see companies that are acting together to try to self-regulate themselves and understand what kind of guiding principles they can follow, which is basically what you just
absolutely.
explained anyway.
So Ethos emerged out of basically conversations between myself and Rupal Patel, who's the CEO of a text-to-speech company called Vocalid. And she and I were talking about a lot of these ethical issues. And in particular, we were talking about how a lot of sort of the common discussion seems to sort of frame technologists as necessarily the bad guys. And even when we started developing this software for Modulate, we got plenty of people reaching out to us saying, you're developing malware, you're developing something fundamentally evil. The technology itself is evil, you have to stop this. And she and I were talking about sort of our shared experience that every one of the technologists and the founders we had connected with is actually extremely passionate about thinking about ethics and thinking about social responsibility. And these are people who are incredibly smart, building incredibly fascinating things, who are actively trying to hold themselves back in a way that's going to make sense. But we're not really able to effectively have that conversation as a society. These people are going out and asking society, look, this technology is coming one way or another. I want to do it responsibly. What should I do? And unfortunately, most of the answer that they're getting back is, you're evil, shut up. And that's just not actionable. And you know, packing it up and going home, even if the founder chose to do that, someone else is going to build that technology, and they're just going to be that much less worried about the ethics. And so Ethos kind of formed out of Rupal and I just chatting about this. This is such a shame. There should be more of an opportunity for us all to work together towards common cause, towards making this better. So to be honest, we're still trying to figure out what exactly that should look like from an action perspective. But so far, we've been able to gather quite a few different sort of founders and senior members of probably 10 to 15 different synthetic media companies working, especially in audio as well as in visual, who are thinking about this kind of synthetic data generation and the ethical challenges that it brings up. And we'll somewhat regularly sort of have conversations in a sort of a private channel, as well as sort of scheduling talks between each other. We're now trying to think about how can we bring these conversations out to the wider parts of society as well, so that it's not just folks from industry kind of talking to each other in a circle, but we really do want to make sure we know that people from the wider world are going to have really unique perspectives and fears that we may not have thought of. And I've had good experiences with that before. It's just difficult to mediate. So we're really trying to figure out what's a good way we can open up these conversations where it's going to be more fruitful than people just telling us, you're evil, therefore go home. But where we actually can hear a lot of the really distinct and unique perspectives that these people have that we might be somewhat blind to, because we are the builders of this technology and we are going to be biased in favor of the positive ways it can be used.
For sure.
Sure.
That's actually really interesting. Not that I didn't imagine that these kinds of thoughts were already going into the ethical implications of it, but I guess in my mind, it was the technology was sort of at the forefront of everything, and the ethical implications were behind it. But what I'm hearing here is that even if it's not like actually fully equal, the ethical implications might actually be in front of what the technology development is, because of understanding the potential negative use cases that are available with something like this.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And again, you're not the only one who has that perception that it's just kind of the tech running forward. But I do think it's really important to understand, again, there are there people out there who are building technology like this without any care in the world for the impact on society? Sure. I'm certain some of those people are out there. Unfortunately, maybe some of them are even sort of under the employ of certain nation states or something like that. But the vast majority of people, at least in industry that I've interacted with, they're not just paying lip service. They're actively attending events. They're asking questions. They're trying to collaborate with each other. They're trying to find ways, even to get sort of government regulation involved. Though, as you called out, that's a pretty slow process that I think is still in very much the early stages. But I think, if nothing else, even the most self-serving people in industry realize it's a whole lot better to have what's allowed defined clearly than for us all to be kind of gambling on our own interpretations of it and knowing that at some point someone's going to make a different call and it might be totally different from what we had decided to do, right? We're all better off if we know where the lines are that we're allowed to paint within. And I think the more people we can get involved in that conversation earlier, the better those lines are going to be for actually sort of shaping a society that we all want to be a part of.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And the coolest part is hearing about how you guys are trying to build things into the technology as like a safety, because, not to pick on them, but let's say like I have a background in biology and genetics. And with that, like, some of the experiments that have gone on in China, where it's like the ethical implications aren't being considered because they just want to do it. And the things that they've gone about, even though, they've been pushed back on, but it's just like when it comes to this stuff, especially as everything goes like more and more and more online, and understanding the potential stuff that comes with deep fakes, whether it's voice or video or anything, it's something that I've been sitting there with for a while now, just being like, I hadn't spoken to anybody, but I had absolutely been like, oh, like they must be so excited about the tech that the ethical implications are sort of like lagging behind, and that's going to cause some like massive repercussions at some point.
Yeah, no, it's really, really important to balance these things. And something that's been fascinating to me is, not just understanding how can we build sort of fail-safes into the technology, which I agree is incredibly important, but as the builders of the technology, we're probably the most intimately familiar with the limitations that it has. And so something that my co-founder brought up in a previous conversation that I thought was really fascinating was we've thought a lot about how does our technology interact with people trying to do voice ID for passwords for financial accounts or something like that. And today, a lot of those voice ID systems do primarily focus on what is the timbre of your voice in a way where it is conceivable if a bad actor got their hands on our technology, they might be able to use it to fool some of those systems. And that's a conversation we're trying really hard to have with these major institutions that are using it. But what's really interesting is that the very fact that we're trying to process audio in real time limits what we're able to change. We cannot change where you insert your pauses or how you emotively express what it is that you're saying. Because to do that in a coherent way, we would have to listen to not just what you've said, but the next second or so of what it is that you're saying so that we can kind of make that modification correctly. Think about the sentence, I am so excited versus I am so angry. We don't know how to emote the first words until we get to that last word. And so that fact means that we actually can't convert everything in real time. And so if you want to build a good voice ID system, it kind of needs to straddle that middle ground where it's looking at enough of the sort of timbre and the vocal cords that the average human imitator can't fool it. But it's also looking at enough of the higher level stuff, looking at your speech pattern and the way that you tend to sort of respond to a comment with certain pauses, with certain emotions, looking at those trends that are much harder for an AI system to fool. And, we believe it's possible that there actually is kind of a sweet spot there that's safe from both accounts. But it's not what people are doing right now blindly. And so I think there's a lot of really interesting wisdom like that, where there's the opportunity for us as the builders to also sort of provide the most powerful ammunition possible to the people who want to build defenses against it.
I also like the fact that it makes me laugh because you mentioned something about building basically the ethics from the beginning so that you don't find yourself facing any problems in a few years when regulations will come into play. And so I was imagining yourself sitting in front of the senators and talking about Senator, we sell ads kind of scenario. And it made me think of Cambridge Analytica. And of course, that's exactly the situation in which no one thought or ignored the possible repercussions of the use of technology in a certain way. In this case, social media and data, and profiling. And that's what we got. So I hope, and I'm actually very positive because the few people that work in this industry that I've talked to, surprisingly, have all refused to adopt the Obama voice. So it's a very good sign. Azeem knows because I've frustratingly been going back to him saying I need someone who does the Obama voice, but actually in the end I realized that I
think it's a delicate balance, and I think 50 years from now, will creating sort of a dubbed piece of audio from a well-known public figure, will that still be considered unethical?
Mm-hmm.
I think the odds are probably no. In the same way that you can buy a Donald Trump face mask or you can buy a Barack Obama face mask today, everyone kind of understands that there's certain elements of political figures that can become fair game, but only after society understands what that technology is and has sort of sufficiently developed the immune system for it. And so, today the concern is not just, Obama as a public figure, but it's also how many people are going to actually realize that this is fake. And what we've found, I think, as the industry is, even if you start the video shouting to the rooftops, this is a synthesized voice, you would be amazed how many people don't understand it, and don't believe that could be synthesized or sort of accidentally store it in their brain as something Obama really said, and they remember it later and don't remember that it came from this synthetic context. And so until we're more familiar and more used to this technology being out there, I do think it really does pay for us to be very conservative in terms of even the public figures where technically, as far as trademark law and stuff like that goes, I do believe that you would technically have the right to do something for a public figure. But from an ethical standpoint, I just don't think that society is in a place where that's the right approach for us to be taking.
Well, how do I reference the technology itself? This is not. It's not. You mentioned something earlier. It's not. It's natural language processing. It's not. That.
Yeah. So it's
an evolution
broad
of that
category of what sort of the general public might refer to as deepfakes. We in the industry prefer to refer to as synthetic media, and that includes audio, visuals, even sort of synthetic text.
I like that.
So synthetic media is the larger category, and then as you go within it, you might break down along various sectors. Where again, sort of within that space, Modulate is working on primarily sort of speech-to-speech synthesis, as opposed to text-to-speech synthesis or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Is this same technology, can it be used to translate a conversation live?
Great question.
As
absolutely not. This would be a really valuable application if it could, but you have the same limitation I was talking about before in terms of how much you can change in real time. So I don't know too much Italian, but I know a little bit of Spanish from school. Tengo in Spanish typically means I have, but tengo hambre means I am hungry. So if you just heard the word tengo, your translation app does not know whether to translate that as I am or I have until it hears the next word. And so that means there's always going to have to be some latency where you wait a couple of extra words before you can synthesize the current word. And so if I'm trying to do that in a live conversation with you, you would be sort of hearing an extra maybe 5 seconds of latency before you hear my response, and it would just very, very badly slow down the conversation, as opposed to the voice skins you heard me using before, which add almost no perceptible latency at all.
Gotcha. And also it would be a nightmare with a language like English, where basically if you're ordering a pizza in your own language, you have to spell everything out to the other person on the other side of the phone. So I would imagine this AI basically asking,
there's
sorry,
a lot of
it?
interesting kind of information theoretic analyses of what are good error robust languages, and English is not it. So I'm with you there.
Can we talk about other possible applications where, of course, Modulate can come into play? So you mentioned gaming, because, of course, I might be in a space where I want to use another voice. Maybe my avatar is a female and I want to use a female avatar with a certain personality. How do you imagine that working? And this could be actually quite of an interesting blue ocean for you guys. Think of an audio-related platform like podcasts or same of Clubhouse that's coming out recently, which is audio predominant. It's just audio. And so, are you thinking of applications there? Do you already have anything in place?
The product that we've developed is an SDK designed to be plugged into any voice chat system within any game or application. So we've built sort of additional tools to help game developers. They're often using one of a couple game engines. So we've built them specific plugin versions of the SDK for those game engines. But our core SDK plugs directly into whatever application you have. And there's just sort of one entry point where you say, once you've gotten the audio off the mic, before you send it out over the network, run it through Modulate first, and we'll hand you back the audio buffers and you send it out. So it's very, very easy to plug in. And while we're primarily sort of working with game studios right now, we do have a couple of social applications that we're starting to work with behind the scenes on an integration for. So we absolutely kind of, in the end of the day, I almost see that as entirely the same space, right? Why do people play Fortnite today? Well, the vast majority of them aren't doing it specifically because they want to compete. They're doing it because that's where they hang out. Exactly.
Yeah. Socialize. Is there latency in the conversation?
There's no such thing as absolutely zero latency. In our case, we're adding something between 10 to 13 milliseconds of latency. But that's actually so low that I can loop my processed voice back into my own headphones. And as I'm speaking, it sounds even to me like I have a different voice. The kind of limit for that is 30 to 50 milliseconds.
Okay. So it's not disturbing
So
you,
if it took more
speaking.
than that 30 to 50 milliseconds, I would kind of be getting an echo effect, which studies have actually shown it makes it almost impossible for you to speak coherently. But yeah, so, and you don't have to do the loopback in all cases when you're using it. But for me, I find that it's really valuable. And when people turn on,
the deep announcer voice like this one, you find that they naturally slow down and elongate their words, because that's how a character like this would speak. And so hearing it themselves helps them immerse themselves even deeper.
Absolutely, yeah.
You get into the character. That makes sense.
That's interesting.
Do you want to give us, Mike? Sorry to go back in history. Do you want to tell us a bit of your background, just to understand better where you're coming from?
The idea for Modulate sort of traces its roots back to my time in undergraduate, which is when I met my co-founder, Carter Huffman. So he and I were undergraduates at MIT, literally met because we were both studying physics, and he was working on a physics problem on a whiteboard, and I was walking down the hall and looked at it and said, that looks interesting, and went over and helped him solve solve it, which probably tells you way more about the kind of nerds we are than you needed to know. But so, we became fast friends, and even within college, we sort of realized we wanted to build a startup, and actually spent a better part of our junior and senior year trying out different startup ideas. And nothing that we were kind of testing really stuck with us. Nothing really resonated. We were both very interested in technology, very interested in artificial intelligence. We decided to go into industry to kind of bolster our skills. And at that point, I chose a couple of opportunities in industry that I thought would sort of help me figure out how to do team building, how to think about culture from the perspective of sort of the CEO side of a company. Carter, being sort of the really deep technologist of the two of us, went and tried to really hone his technical skills. And so he ended up actually at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab out in Pasadena as a machine learning scientist. And so the big work that was happening sort of around that time, which is 2014, 2015 in machine vision, which was Carter's original area, was neural style transfer. So like upload a family photo and get it back in the style of Picasso or Van Gogh, which is kind of the early predecessor of the quote unquote deepfakes that you sort of know today. And Carter was looking at this technology, and he and I were having one of our regular calls, and he brought up almost offhand, audio can be represented as an image, as a spectrogram. What if you did that neural style transfer to the spectrogram and then turned it back to audio? Wouldn't you have some kind of a voice changer? And I swear to you, we had one of those TV moments where we stared at each other for a good 30 seconds before either of us could speak. And we're like, yeah, that would be a big idea. Maybe we should do that. So it was very sort of happenstance, just because we had been constantly sort of playing with all this new technology that came across our attention. And finally we hit on this and said, oh man, this could be really cool. We did some research and found no one had really made much progress solving this problem. So it was ripe for someone to come in and sort of carve out a niche there. So we ended up spending probably about a year and a half of nights and weekends research. And I like to say we, even though it was almost entirely Carter who developed this. And by the end, by 2018, we started to finally hear something resembling a human voice coming at the other end. That was when we knew for sure that we had something. So that was the point at which we actually stepped away from our full-time jobs, went all in on Modulate, had almost a full year before we raised money, where we were kind of working out of our apartments, living off of our savings, pretending to have an office by meeting people at nearby coffee shops, the whole sort of true startup deal. And then finally, by the end of 2018, we'd had enough opportunities with folks in the gaming and really been able to pin down how are we going to bring this product to market. We had put together a solid plan. And so that was when we were able to raise our first round of funding from a couple of sort of future-looking investors that have been really great supporters of us. So it was really 2019 that we closed that round and really kicked off sort of the Modulate as an actual company that we know today.
The word genius is probably overused today, and you see the word used on any Facebook video which is featuring either a cat or anything.
I agree with that.
But you guys deserve this. One thing that pops into my mind is one of the other applications that you probably already have looked into, but I've noticed a lot of gamers are recently faking to be other people. Like a famous gamer is pretending to be a not so good player so that they can record another player or another team teaching him how to play. This is becoming a big thing. And so I noticed that they do try to change their voices, but sometimes they get caught because they're so famous on YouTube or Twitch that the actual gamers on the other side actually recognize them. So that could be an interesting way of promoting you guys also.
We haven't participated in something
it,
like that. I agree, though. I think, for the most part, I think those are things that are all done with a very playful intent. Everyone's largely having a good time. There, unfortunately, are some examples of people trying to use that so that they can kind of catch amateurs and make fun of them or something like that. And I wouldn't want to kind of participate in that sort of campaign. But
okay.
I think for the most part, these are really people just sort of having a good time. And the big thing here is, these games have incredibly rich communities these days, and in some part this is just the streamers as, in some sense, kind of the representatives of the communities, trying to make sure that they understand all the parts and are getting involved. But I think the other piece is sometimes you don't want to be the famous player. Sometimes you just want to, chill out and have a good time. And if that game is the venue that you go to hang out, I can very much empathize with some of the more recognizable streamers saying, sometimes I don't want to put forward my big streamer personality. I want to showcase a different side of me. And I think that's another application where if we can give them the voice that allows them to separate out those two parts of identity, neither of them are false, right? Neither of them are lying. It's no different from the fact that I put on different clothes when I'm going into the office for a big important meeting than I do when I'm hanging out with my friends and going to see a movie, right? It's just different ways of expressing yourself.
Or a celebrity trying to avoid paparazzi on the street. This thing that came into my mind while you were talking about your experience in terms of studies, I entered a room which wasn't the one where on Clubhouse, which it wasn't the one in which Elon Musk talked, but they had a recording of it, and people were discussing about what he said, and there were, I think most of them actually worked with him, and they said something interesting about the fact that, they found him working with first principles, asking questions, and I saw the side of him that probably you would see mostly at work, which is the engineer part. And then people started asking, of course, with engineers, you also need, the theoretical physicist or the someone bringing the theory, because you need both and the balance of two. And I was thinking maybe this is the exact kind of scenario and story you guys experience with your startup, where there's a more, let's call it a greasy hands person who's actually making things happen, and the other one who's thinking the theory, of course. In your case, that you're both great minds, of course. And that doesn't mean that one is, just the slave of the other, but that sometimes you just need the balance between these two figures.
I'm flattered that you potentially see me that way, but I gotta confess, with where we sort of approached it, I would probably put both the engineer and the theorist hat on Carter. I think the role that I played in a lot of the development of the software, and I'm not a terrible programmer by any stretch, but Carter is absolutely the one who dove deeper into this scenario. And I think the value that I was able to provide wasn't that I had the full picture of the theory. That was still something that he was also kind of managing, but it was that I, having been trained as a physicist and a mathematician, thinking about things from a very sort of high level frameworked way that I do, I think that where the skill set that I have that was really valuable is my ability to sort of force people to actually express things clearly. And so my job was less to have the really unique idea, but if Carter's running into a place that he's getting himself confused, have him explain it to me, but where I'm really sort of pushing him to say, no, that didn't quite make sense. You didn't just explain that coherently. And what we end up finding is, Carter's the one who finally notices, oh, this is the thing I was missing. It's not even that I find the answer through this process, but I'm able to provide sort of a resource for him to help him kind of carve down his thinking into something really sort of minimal and really clear, so that he can more easily identify what might not be sort of coherent or fully thought through. And okay, that's the right place to jump into.
Okay, gotcha. Still, I don't think anyone can do anything by himself. You always need a mentor, a sponsor, someone supporting and in the idea and helping you sometimes figure out, just making your mind around things and breaking them down into pieces, and someone actually criticizing them. So it's a tedious, very, very painful, but necessary
Absolutely.
process.
And I'm certainly not, trying to artificially put myself down. I think I certainly provide, I hope I provide a lot of real value to Modulate. But I think there's there's common startup wisdom that, ideas are cheap. It's execution that matters. And I think I've come over the last couple of years to understand the mentality that leads to people saying something like that. I don't 100% believe it. Some of the ideas that have enabled us to develop this technology have been incredibly important and incredibly revolutionary. And I don't at all want to take that away from our technology and research team that's been able to develop those ways of thinking. But I think there's also, how do you figure out how to talk about a new technology like this? How do you answer questions like what a voice is? If a voice skin is just a set of vocal cords, well, could those vocal cords belong equally to a 16-year-old person and a 50-year-old person? If so, what's the identity that those correspond to? How do you communicate that? How do you think about distributing that both in an ethical way and in a way where users are going to get the most value out of it? So I think that's the place where I've been able to really provide value by sort of digging in with our end users, with our customers, and asking some of these very sort of fuzzy questions around what does it mean to use these voices and what is the impact of having this stuff. And I think that's helped us shape ultimately a much more concrete roadmap where we're able to have a much firmer understanding of what is the technology we need to develop to turn this business into something really successful, not just from our revenue perspective, but from an impact on society perspective. How can we have the most positive impact on all of those people out there who are looking for a better way to immerse themselves, looking in many cases for more powerful ways to express true parts of their identity. So I think that's the place that I've really come in. But I would definitely sort of emphasize that from the technical invention part, Carter definitely took the helm on that side.
Gotcha. I was watching yesterday evening on Netflix the horrible remake of Ghost in the Shell. And there's a point in which you realize that people are communicating, of course, cyborgs and hybrids, people that have actually implanted themselves with technology and enhanced their abilities, are talking with each other through just mind communication, so without even speaking. And I was thinking that in a future like that, you would have exactly what you just defined, which is you'd have a voice which is lived as a skin, which is exactly wore as you would wear sunglasses of different colors depending on your mood. And I can totally see that. A question I have for Azeem there is, in a world that was supposed to go full on enriched media, so we've been brainwashed with Facebook for ages, trying to make images even more immersive, and then there's 360, and then there's VR, and then there's AR, and then all of a sudden other platforms that are exploding at the moment are based on a very, very basic and natural and maybe primordial aspect of our life, which is our voice. I almost feel like it's taking two different directions, and even social networks are almost diverging into the passive, even though it's not passive because you can still chat and do whatever you want, but it's hyper-stimulating world of social networks, which its ultimate evolution is probably gaming. And then this new direction, which audio-based communities are being created, which allow us to actually distract ourselves less from the real world. So on one side, you've got gaming, which is the hype, which is basically another life, a second life, if we wanted to mention.
Man, I think it's just like,
what do you think?
Different people as we go are going to sort of like pick their niches. I think it's good that like it's sort of diverging, because we've all spent so much time on the same exact versions of social media. But I think community as a whole is something that's really going to be leading the future. And, you know, I hear a lot of like top venture capitalists and entrepreneurs talking about everything being community first. I have a friend who recently, he has a company where it's a paid community. It's a Slack group where it gives people access to the most exclusive sneaker releases and information in just like the fashion space, but more so focused on sneakers. The company does over $100,000 a month in revenue based on the thousands of members they have paying over $30 a month and the affiliate fees that they make from just putting out links for people to be able to purchase things. They just finished raising over $2 million from top venture capitalists, and they're honestly just getting started. And so I think, you know, it's an example of where community's going, and like the internet's gotten to a point where now, in some ways we've seen it in bad ways because we see like people find their echo chambers and then sort of don't leave. But, you know, I think having these like different forms of media, whether it's audio, it's, you know, going into the metaverse, like we talked about last time. And like, I see a world, even for instance, like where you never get to see who someone really is because they use their digital representations of themselves. And maybe they even use a fake voice. So they create a pseudonym that becomes popular for who they are, and they can do interviews with it and everything they want to. So I think we're just going into like an asynchronous world where different people will be involved and interested in different stuff and like find their communities, as opposed to it like sort of the expectation in the past, like, you know, 15 years, let's say, around where social media has been budding and growing, that we're like, everyone will be on Facebook and everyone will use it the same way, and everyone will be on Instagram, and then you download Snapchat. And we're already seeing it like with the users of like who would want to be on Clubhouse versus the TikTok. So I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think I'm largely on the side of Azeem here, though. I want to be a little bit of a stickler, and one of the phrases that I heard you say, Azeem, is, you know, never get to know who someone really is, and to maybe be a little bit pedantic. Who I really am isn't my biology, right? Like that's the least interesting thing about me. I'm my choices, and I'm my self-perception, much more so than I am, you know, the physical form that I happen to have been granted. And I think people are shifting into online interaction where people will express themselves in wholly different ways, and that's not holding something back. That's actually finding new ways to help people understand them more deeply, with maybe the most sort of overt example of this being the frankly tremendous number of trans gamers who have reached out to us and expressed how powerful it's been to be able to see themselves actually speaking with a voice that matches their identity when they're online socializing with people, as opposed to being held back by their biology. So again, maybe
it's a community I didn't take into account when Azeem was talking, but now it makes me think. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, guys. I think we got way past the hour, so I just want to give everybody's life back, or digital life back.
This is awesome.
Thank you for having me,
guys.
It was great to
chat. It's been a lovely chat.
All right, everyone, take care.
Thanks.